it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Exorcisms are real practices that have been performed in various cultures and religions for centuries. And the term exorcism typically refers to a ritualistic and spiritual practice aimed at expelling perceived evil spirits, demons, or malevolent entities from a person, place, or object. Belief in possession by malevolent entities and the practice of exorcism are most commonly associated with certain religious traditions, including Christianity. They can be found in other belief systems too. I'd just bought a new house. Well, I'd been shopping for a while, and with the market the way it is, I had to jump at the estate sale find that was still stuffed full of old belongings. Not ideal, but I needed it. As I was cleaning out, I came across 2 letters, and I thought I'd share them with all of you, because, well, I'm not sure what to make of them. I found the first one in the nightstand, folded up without an envelope. Echoes of an Exorcism, Part 1. Dearest Dana, the end comes slowly for many of us nowadays. Medicine keeps people alive much better than it used to, and we can linger in an in-between, neither fully alive nor actually deceased. I'm proceeding this way. I can judge it now by how many days pass between moments I can clearly remember. I see it in your eyes when you visit, and I worry that it wears on you, that it breaks off bits of your soul along the way. You're the only one I still have left, by the way. Others make excuses in letters and calls, spinning tales of traffic and schedules and hardship. Losing a child does that, of course. My own offspring might serve as more of a forcing mechanism for the various nieces and nephews of mine that remain in this world. I sense your apprehension. I sense the growing darkness between the moments of light. And I want you to know that I'm glad you stuck with me until the end. Well, I both hate and love it here. It's the ocean, never changing but also never the same. The floors smell of lemon-scented cleaner. The only marker of time passing is the regular substitutions among the population, with new faces introduced as the old ones disappear. I have fun watching the staff, the young ones who still have lives beyond these walls. The whole world plays out in simple interactions. Whiskey on the breath of one staff member who no longer wears his wedding ring. Sly glances between 2 others that tell you of their flirtations, which have finally blossomed into something more. I have such vivid dreams now. I wonder if I'm in them on the days you visit and I don't remember. Am I awake? Asleep? I feel I'm mostly living in the past at this point. An echo that still reverberates around inside a body that's quickly failing. Do I speak to you? Are there bits of wisdom in there? I imagine it's a slurred mix of English and my native tongue, nonsense blended with the promise of some hidden truth known only to those close to death. They tell me I've been screaming in the night. I certainly have been, but not for the reasons they think. Look, there are things I need to tell you, and I hope I still have time to do it. You've grown into a remarkable young woman, and I've left you everything I still have. Well, you'll need it to deal with the mistakes I've made, and the cost of those mistakes. There are nightmares still to come, poor child, and I'm deeply sorry for that. My truth begins beyond the ocean, before I came to America, in the old country. A place I thought I left behind long ago, and now I realize that that's a silly thought. Decades and distance do nothing to prevent some things from returning to you. Some secrets cannot be hidden away. They're always trying to crawl their way back to the surface. I know I've never spoken much of my childhood, even when you pried, so I hope you'll indulge me now. I lived in the city for years as a young child before we suddenly departed for life in the countryside. I, the youngest of 4 children, along with 2 older brothers, Henry and Jack, strong and handsome and wonderful, and a sister, Ashley, only a year older than I was. She was my best friend in the world, and we spent afternoons playing and talking about everything under the sun. I never knew Mother, neither did Ashley. She had died of the flu the same year I was born, and while Father did his best afterwards, he never truly recovered. After the war, Father accepted a position in the mountains working for the government. I didn't understand the work then, barely understand it now. I just knew we moved from a sensible home in the city to a giant mansion of a home in a mountain town complete with a giant staff who doted on us. Well, life became magical. I imagined I went to sleep one night and awoke a princess. It seemed as though the entire town worked for Daddy in some capacity, either at the government project in the mine down by the railroad yard, or the manor grounds doing one job or another. Ashley and I felt like royalty, and in many senses we were. Our first year there was magical. The town often became inaccessible for stretches of winter due to snow on the tracks, but we arrived in spring and watched the beautiful area come alive with blooms and leaves. My father worked a lot, and Henry and Jack helped him with his projects, or hunted in the woods and planned for their futures. I still remember them returning from their hunts, dirty and smiling, hauling animals they cleaned and roasted for feasts. Well, if there is a heaven, I hope it's that year, where the future spread out magically before us and it felt like our happiness would last forever. Our second year seemed better still. Father tested his project, and suddenly the entire town had electricity. Well, this might seem like no big deal to a child who'd grown up with modern technology, but in the mountains after the war, life suddenly illuminated. I ran through a house that glowed magically. This must seem so silly to you now, but life shined with promise. That year passed much as the first. Daddy worked harder than ever, and the staff watched over Ashley and I, gently guiding us and ensuring we didn't miss our studies. Henry, my oldest brother, began courting Louise, the only daughter of a notable family in town, and all the staff talked in hushed tones about how beautiful the wedding would be. Two things happened as autumn turned to winter, dual events that soured our moods. The first being the arrival of the horrible Mr. Hawkes. He was a glum man with a face constantly twisted in a look of unhappiness. There was something off about him, his manner strict and dull. He stalked around the town and our home in an impervious way. The government had sent him an audit of some type, and he constantly seemed to be everywhere, watching everyone. Ashley whispered that we had to watch him in return, lest he make trouble for Daddy. No one sucked the joy from a room like Mr. Hawkes did. Moreover, he made my skin itch, like a bug had run over it. I'd often catch him standing and staring at Ashley from a distance, eyes narrowed towards her as she played, but the rest of the time he seemed to spend in constant, unhappy motion. The second occurrence came shortly after the arrival of Mr. Hawkes. Henry and Jack were hunting in the woods beyond the mine when suddenly winter arrived early. The blizzard caught us all off guard. We didn't have warning in those times, no days of breathtaking coverage by overly excited weathermen to prepare us. One moment we sat in the fields enjoying a picnic on a crisp fall day. The next, huge snowflakes stung our cheeks as we raced back to the manor. The hunting party had been stretched across a wide area when the storm hit, and they all quickly found themselves lost in the snow. Over the course of the evening I sat by the front door as men came back one by one. It was nightfall when Henry returned, smiling warmly as I leapt into his arms. By morning, 3 men remained missing. Jack, a popular boy named George from the village, and an old hunter named Frank all remained lost in the snow. The blizzard raging outside ensured no search party could be mounted, and I stared despondently at the front door, praying for a miracle. Frank stumbled in around midday, frozen and cursing. He claimed to have heard someone yelling for help in the woods, and found himself walking in circles, chasing a voice that seemed to appear and then vanish with the shifting wind. He seemed unnerved by the events, which scared me more than anything. Now, you have to understand Frank to fully grasp this, but this man had hunted in those woods since long before I was born, and I didn't think him capable of feeling fear, aside from his obvious discomfort at the electric lights he squinted at whenever he drew near. Night fell on the second night, and Father looked despondent until Jack arrived. He was half frozen, mumbling about hearing George in the woods. Well, we never found George, but we summoned the town doctor and put Jack to bed, and I prayed with such thanks in my heart for Jack's safe return. The next week passed peacefully. Jack recovered quickly, and we mourned George's disappearance. I spent as much time as he let me sitting in his room, making him sing an old lullaby to me. We tumbled into our winter normality, where we'd stay in the house, though the house never felt quite as safe, with Mr. Hawkes lurking about even more. I studied him, determined to ensure he left town. I watched as he stalked the halls, snuck around while he stared at Ashley, and I began writing little notes detailing his comings and goings. I still remember the first event. I sat in the library doing my studies, and annoyed made me glance up. It sounded like a stifled laugh, like someone trying to hide themselves while playing a prank, only darker, angrier. I looked around the library which, while large, did not leave anywhere to hide. The noise unnerved me, and even though it remained such a small moment, I continued to ponder it. Some things simply stick with you, and this did. Other things happened. The staff began to talk about whispers from empty corridors. Objects moved from locked rooms. An odd feeling settled over the house, a sense of unease that became clearer. Ashley would vanish for long stretches at a time. She said that Mr. Hawkes made her feel nervous and she had to hide from him. But things felt wrong for the first time since our arrival. Have you ever walked into the woods, just as far and as deep as you dare? You see, as you venture in, you don't notice how thick the trees become, how far away the light of the open air gets. And these moments played out like that. A sudden realization that everything is suddenly different. You don't recall when the light first dimmed, only that you now find yourself in a dark and foreign place, and your compass no longer points home. Mr. Hawkes began discussing Ashley's behavior with the staff. I would hear him whispering urgently, hear the sharp way he used her name. The staff remained on edge, claiming that doors would shut and lock behind them, suddenly trapping them in bedrooms and closets. Mr. Hawkes tried to discuss something with Daddy, but got yelled at in response, an argument that swelled my heart with pride. Life stretched. I can't describe it better than that. The atmosphere seemed more taut each day, as though we'd found ourselves caught in some ancient device that would simply continue its torture until we snapped, and snap we would. The night it happened, I heard the laugh again, stifled and angry and dark, a sound that I can't describe but will never forget. I stirred from my bed and heard it again, now outside my bedroom door. I'll never forget that night, padding through the dark halls following the sound of the laughter, chasing it through the darkness. Each step terrified me, as did the dull glow down the stairs that grew brighter as I drew closer. I knew I shouldn't go, that I should go back to bed or summon Daddy or someone to help. But I felt drawn towards the light in a room where no one should remain in the middle of the night. The laughter drew me onwards, and before long I stood before a scene that no child should see. Henry laid on the floor, bleeding profusely from his head. Ashley sat next to him, covered in blood and surrounded by candles, staring blankly at the wall. The occult nightmare in front of me was a new hell, but it would not be the last time I felt that I suddenly existed only in the darkness. I screamed. Did I scream? I screamed until I heard shouts, until the pounding footsteps entered the room, until someone scooped me up and carried me away from that nightmare. Truthfully, if I knew then what I know now, I never would have stopped screaming. I must rest now, but I'll write more tomorrow. Your loving Grandma. Part 2. Well, writing this certainly awoke my imagination. I could barely sleep last night, thinking I heard sounds all night long, tapping on windows and scratching on doors. Oh, I found this second letter stuffed under one of the beds, and it obviously happened after the first one. I haven't found any more. My sweet Dana, I hope you remember where I left off. These things slip a little, you see. I see the tale I must lead us on in this journey through my head, but remembering where I stopped off to rest is difficult. It's things like that, or if your address begins with 15 or 51, that cause me the most annoyance. Will you think of me the same after this? Well, there are times I've wondered if you know, but of course you don't. You can't. Will you blame me when you learn I killed my sister, that I ruined my family? Is there grace in your heart for that terrified little girl? Well, I can only describe the discussions that followed as fierce. Ashley was bound to her bed for her own safety, Daddy said, while the doctor tended to Henry's wounds. I still remember her screaming as she was carried to her room, an inhuman wail that haunts me still. Mr. Hawkes called for the priest in town, Father Pierre, and I heard him tell Daddy that he'd suspected Ashley was possessed for some time, that darkness lurked inside her tiny body. Well, I'll forgive many people many things, but I'll never forgive Mr. Hawkes for this. The manor was suddenly in motion. I felt that something dangerous moved beneath the surface, searching for freedom. I couldn't make sense of the bedlam, and I burst into tears whenever I saw Daddy or Jack, or when the doctor let me sit by Henry's bedside. Children should not have to deal with such things. No one should. I knew somehow that once events sprang into motion, there'd be no stopping them. The next night, Daddy called the staff together. He thanked everyone for their hard work, and I thought in that moment, standing in the main hall with everyone staring at him, that he seemed frailer than ever before. He stepped aside, letting the priest speak. Young Ashley has been stricken with a demon, Father Pierre began, and he listed his reasons for believing she'd been possessed, as he'd studied these things in some faraway land, lessons hard won in his youth. Well, she didn't have a normal appetite, and many people felt cold when around her. She'd flown into a rage and attacked Henry, who was easily 3 times her size. Mr. Hawkes claimed he'd heard her speaking in a different language she shouldn't know, and that she knew of occurrences before they happened, that once she'd remarked on the arrival of a visitor a full hour before they made it to the manor. I fought then. I fought for Ashley. I fought against Mr. Hawkes. Oh, I hated him so much. I still do. I screamed at the staff. I said that Ashley had always been a picky eater, and the staff snuck her sweets during the day, despite knowing it ruined her appetite more, because they loved how she smiled at them. I told them the entire house was drafty in the winter, that any room might be cold if the wind blew. I said that she'd learned the words she spoke from the travelling singer the year before. They'd all seen him, and that there remained a spot in the South Tower where you could see clear to the village, that we often played a game where we watched people departing for the manor, trying to guess who would come by their manner of walk and dress, and then waiting for their arrival to see if we guessed correctly. I could still see their eyes, gentle and caring and sad. They saw a scared child in front of them, innocent and longing to protect her sister. Well, they weren't wrong either, but I realized in that moment that no one would believe my words. No one would protect Ashley from what came next. The priest announced he'd begin the exorcism. Daddy and Jack and Mr. Hawkes and several men from the staff would assist him. Father Pierre had travelled in his youth and was well versed in these things, Jack whispered in my ear. If anyone could drive off the beast living inside Ashley, this old demon hunter could, he reassured me. The men began to prepare, and I watched them hand out Bibles and crucifixes, readying themselves for what came next. Inside her room, Ashley began to scream, no doubt knowing what stood in her future. I pleaded with the men not to do it. I told them a mistake had been made. They avoided my eyes as I beseeched each of them in turn, each turning away, unwilling to make eye contact with the terrified young child before them. Mr. Hawkes pulled aside Daddy, whispering that he knew such things could harm a young woman's reputation, and he would be willing to marry Ashley when she came of age, to ensure our family faced no disreputable rumours. My heart broke in that moment, both realizing what fate Ashley faced if she survived this ordeal, and that Daddy felt gratitude at the disgusting offer made about a girl still a child. The men filed into Ashley's room and began their rites, and the screaming began immediately. I heard them chanting prayers for hours, while Ashley yelled at them to stop. Smoke slipped from beneath the door, and the lights throughout the entire house flickered, plunging me in and out of darkness. Princeps, gloriosissime, celestis militiae, sancte Michelangelo, defende nos in proelio adversus principes e prostetases, adversus mundi rectores tenebrarum harum, contra spiritualia nequitiae in celebistus. I stayed there, seated in front of the door for hours. I can still recall the words booming over and over, despite my Latin being poor. Some things you don't forget. The staff would come and stand outside from time to time, but none dared stay for too long. I was the only one who refused to leave. Veni in auxilium hominum, quos Deus ad imaginem simultudinis sue fecit, et e tyrannide diaboli emit pretio magnum. Strange noises erupted from the room from time to time, inhuman wails that boomed through the hall, and it was difficult to keep candles lit. Wind seemed to whip through the house, though the doors were all shut. Te custodem et patronum sancta venerator ecclesia, tibi tradidit dominus animas redentorum in superna felicitate locandas. The door flung open, and a large frog jumped out. I barely had time to consider the strange creature before Mr. Hawkes, covered in sweat, crushed it under his foot before slamming the door shut again. Deprecare Deum pacis, ut conterat satanam sub pedibus nostris, ne ultra valiet captivos tenere homines, et ecclesiae nocere. Screams echoed through the house, inhuman screams. Shadows danced in the hall where no one moved. The periods of darkness were much longer now, and each one I felt something standing near me. Over nostras preces in conspectu altissime, ut situ anticipent nos misericordiae, Domini, et apprehendas draconem, serpentem antiquum, qui est diabolos et satanas, et ligatum metas in abyssum, ut non seducat amplius gentes. Amen. I woke when the door opened, not realizing that the room had fallen silent, or even that I'd fallen asleep. The men filed out, sweaty and tired and scared. I ran to Daddy and asked if Ashley was safe, and he told me that it was not complete yet, but would be soon. He said the men needed to rest and to eat before continuing. The doctor appeared suddenly and summoned Daddy with a burst of whispers, and I suddenly found myself alone, the men rushing off to gorge themselves before continuing. What a strange world that was. Hours of excitement punctuated with pure silence. I stood there, alone with Ashley. I pushed the door open gently and slowly stepped into the room. Darkness covered most of her chamber, but her eyes swung towards me wildly and full of fear, before taking on a pleading look. "It's not me," she said. I stood there, frozen, unsure what I should do next. I saw the thick ropes that tied her to the bed, bodies of rats and frogs strewn about the room, the air cloudy with smoke and incense, and something else, something dark and rotten. "I saw it in the room," she continued. "You know me. You know I'm not possessed. But if they continue to try to do this, it's gonna kill all of them." I stared into her eyes, willed myself to divine whether she spoke the truth. Only Ashley appeared before me. Only her eyes looked back. And so I stepped forward and released the ropes. I'd never been so scared in my life, but also so sure. She leapt from the bed and kissed me on the forehead, telling me softly that we would be safe now, and then slipped through the door and into the hall. I stood there alone, seconds stretching into minutes, until the screams started. Darkness grows near, but I'm afraid I do not have the strength to continue now. Soon I will finish this awful tale. Your foolish grandma. Part 3. Last night I came home and someone was in my house. I yelled and called the police, but they escaped through a window before the police had arrived. While cleaning up after, I found a third letter, and now I don't think I'm safe here anymore. Whoever or whatever broke in was looking for it, and I think they'll be back. Lovely Dana, have you realized yet? Do you sense the foolish mistakes of my youth? Do you realize I cursed them all? We're in the dark woods now, my child, lost and far from home. Of course, we have been, and we didn't suddenly become lost. We weren't dropped here, and still there is a deep fear that comes with this realization. I ran through the woods towards the screams, instinctively knowing which way the echoes bounced from the stone walls, racing until I found myself at the entrance to the deep basements below the manor. There I found Ashley standing over Jack, knife in her hand, poised to kill him. I cannot explain what I thought in that moment. The scene before me made no sense, but I had to protect Jack. I threw myself at Ashley, knocking her to the ground, the knife she used spinning wildly away into the dark. She shrieked like an animal, fighting for freedom, telling me I was making a mistake. Oh, I had made a mistake. I didn't even see Jack as he approached, but I caught a glint of the knife as he thrust it into Ashley's body again and again and again. Whatever he'd become, smiled at me and laughed, a stifled laugh, but one still full of malice, the noise I'd heard twice before. He leaned forward menacingly. Tell Pierre I've been looking for him for a long time. He'll remember why. Tell him where I'm waiting for him. Shouts rang out from the stairwell behind us, and Jack melted into the basement, moving in a manner both unnatural and terrifying, as though his entire body was walking in one direction, but his head faced another. Daddy appeared as I sobbed, and his face when I screamed that Jack had killed Ashley did not register surprise, but rather sadness. Henry stood behind him, with the doctor and Father Pierre. Even Mr. Hawke stood nearby. Henry had woken in the mayhem, and had immediately told Daddy the truth of the night with Ashley, just not in time. The truth of how he found Jack performing some ritual on Ashley, how Jack flew into a rage and attacked. Now, standing before me and Ashley's body, Daddy realized his losses included both a daughter and a son. He knows Father Pierre, I cried. He says he's looked for him for a long time. The priest's face blanched, and I knew he remembered whatever darkness they now faced. Some old battle in a land with a name so old it had been lost, but some things do not forget. The men readied themselves with weapons, and Daddy told me to find a place to hide, that he'd fetch me when it ended. I ran then, ran like I had never run before, as though I might reach a place where none of those awful events had happened. I tucked myself beneath the cabinets near the kitchen, slipped into a dark place too small for anyone but a young girl. I heard screams and shouts and gunfire, smelled smoke and felt doors slam nearby. I heard Jack too, heard him as he crawled out of the basement and stalked from room to room, hunting. I heard him calling my name, heard him demanding others tell him where I was as they died. None knew, though. A young girl has ways of becoming invisible, and I waited. His footsteps still echoed the hallways, and he sang the old lullaby to me, but in a mocking and grotesque tone. In time, the house grew cold and silent, and I could see sunlight peeking through the cabinet doors. Still, I waited. Hours passed before the voices appeared, loud, hard voices, and the heavy footsteps of men moving in unison. The train had broken through the snow that morning, reaching a station with a group of soldiers from the barracks who'd been prevented from returning to town for weeks, stranded while travelling down out of the mountains for provisions. Jack stood alone on the platform to greet them, waving goodbye as they set out to find why the town seemed so empty. While they encountered a horror they could not understand, he simply boarded the train and rode off to another place. The town stood in shambles. House doors stood open, the residents inside butchered mercilessly. They assumed a pack of wolves had fallen on the town, and they searched for hours looking for survivors. In the end, they found only one, a young girl crouched inside a small cabinet, telling a tale of a demon who looked like her brother. Things happened very quickly for me after that. Without relatives living in the country, they sent me across the ocean to live with my aunt and uncle. As I watched my homeland melt into the horizon, I swore I would never return. Let the monster in Jack's skin rot. I would not lay eyes on it or that land ever again. Oh, years passed, my dear. My aunt and uncle were wonderful and raised me well. My cousins became my siblings, and many days I imagined I'd been born here, that the nightmares I left behind were just that, something I'd woken from and allowed to fade. I grew, I met your grandfather and had your father. I built a proud life. I remember the day your mother and father died, while driving your grandfather into town. The police officers were kind. They drove to the hospital at a speed that made me think we might start flying, only to learn that none of them had survived. They couldn't explain why his car had flown off that embankment, only guessing that some animal must have run in front of them. A tragic accident. I stood in that room in shock, clutching you, just a child, to my chest. I shook with what they assumed was grief. It'd be hours before I could communicate the noises that I'd heard. How outside the room where I received such horrible news, I'd heard an angry, stifled laugh. We moved again, sweetheart, you and me. I didn't trust what I'd heard, but I remained unwilling to take any chances with you. I did the best I could raising you, and your parents would be so proud. Even if I can't remember much at the end, I can remember how they looked at you with such love. They still would. We did all right, you and I. The world still manages to be kind to widows and orphans. We moved on, and most days I convinced myself I hadn't really heard it. It happened the last time you visited. So many decades after I'd stopped straining for the sound of it. You'd left, and I made my way out to the common room so I could see you walk into your car. You never knew I did that on days I felt strong enough to, but it was another moment I could spend seeing you. I watched you striding across the parking lot when I heard it. A stifled laugh, one full of darkness and malice, and turned to see an old man also watching you leave. He turned towards me and smiled, and for a moment I almost rushed to embrace Jack before I realized Jack had died a long, long time ago. The eyes, you see, its eyes are all wrong. Whether Jack had died in the woods or the beast in front of me somehow wore his skin, my brother no longer existed in this world. He returns to my room each night now, standing over my bed and whispering awful things while I scream. It tells me about where I go when I don't remember. Nightmares of burning cities and screeching metal. Do not come back to this place. Do not let it find you. It followed me from a land beyond the sea. But maybe when I'm gone, it'll finally find someone else to hunt. I'll love you forever, Grandma. Well, my dear friends, I hope you've all had a lovely week. Pretty busy and hectic one for me. Some rearranged classes because I was ill last week, so been on the go pretty much every day, but still managed to get a few stories out. Hope you enjoyed these week's stories. Yeah, back again probably on Sunday night. I'm not sure yet. Oh, there's a series I've been trying to finish off for ages. I've been promising the author, in fact, that I'm going to finish it off. So that is probably coming up on Sunday. I'm not going to say what it is. Hopefully it's going to be a very, very nice surprise for all of you. Well, weather's still good here. Had incredible flooding the other day. But, looks like everything's still nice, and but heading towards autumn, which is a lovely time of year. So there you go. Well, that's enough for this evening, my dear friends. Till the next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.